In 2011, the hit TV show Game of Thrones brought dark, political fantasy to the mainstream. Suddenly, fantasy adaptations didn't need to be happy-ending, escapist adventures, and bloody battles, wars for the throne, dubious weddings, and violent character deaths were all the rage. But like always, television and the mainstream were a little bit behind. Because 15 years earlier, at the height of the golden age era of fantasy, the Song of Ice and Fire book series redefined commercial fantasy, becoming perhaps the most important works of fantasy released since Lord of the Rings. This timeline is important because if you don't know yet, I'm attempting perhaps the most ambitious reading challenge on BookTube ever. The Great Fantasy Reading Challenge. A challenge where I'm attempting to read every single major fantasy book in chronological order. And so with me still in the Bronze Age era of fantasy, the oldest of any of the 6 eras, I thought there was very little chance I was going to read a brutal, character-driven political fantasy anytime soon. Until I got to the book we're going to discuss today. A book I'm certain, just based off of the Goodreads ratings, virtually none of you have ever heard of, and maybe not a single one of you have ever read. But that's alright, because today it's my pleasure to put you on to one of the most overlooked fantasies from the Bronze Age era of the genre. A political factions war for the throne that leads to the tragic fall of one of fantasy's most iconic settings, Atlantis like you've never seen it before. The Lost Continent by C.J. Cutcliffe Hine is a book I think even modern fantasy fans could love, despite it coming out all the way back in 1899. I mean, this book is older than The Wizard of Oz, and it's moving like this, but does it truly hold up to modern fantasy standards? And what was politically, morally gray fantasy like at this time in the genre? Today, we are going to find out. We're going to talk about the world building, the plot, the cast of characters, the themes, the prose, and the novel's cataclysmic ending. And at the end, I will give my official rating, and we shall truly see if the lost continent of Atlantis deserves to be relived again a century since its fall. Traditionally, fantasy has often leaned on heavy info dumps or expansive prologues to catch the reader up with its family history, pantheon of gods, or relevant backstory. While there is a prologue that we will get to, the real story of Atlantis begins with basically no setup. The public official reception was over. The sentence had been read. I had delivered up the reins of my government. Tatho had seated himself on the snake throne and had put over his neck the chain of gems which symbolized the supreme office. The first page sees a forced transfer of power. The first-person narration comes from the main character of our tale, Deucalion, the former governor of the Atlantean province of Yucatan. For 20 years, Deucalion has led Yucatan almost in isolation from the rest of the Atlantean Empire. But now, without warning, he's been called back to Atlantis and stripped of his power by the new Empress Fornice. And while others may revolt against this, Deucalion accepts it without complaint. Despite being considered amongst the strongest men in all the Empire, one of Deucalion's most prominent traits is his obedience to tradition and to the rigid power systems of Atlantis. He has no wife, no children, and hardly any friends. His loyalties are to the prosperity of Atlantis, the sun god, and nothing more. Deucalion really feels like that trope of the stoic warrior forced into a position of a diplomat. Tatho, another veteran, and probably the closest thing Deucalion has to a real friend, is the one the Empress places in Deucalion's position, which just muddies up the emotions about the switch even more. Tatho explains that while Deucalion has been away, the new Empress has arisen, bringing chaos, and now she needs help to stabilize her realm. And in the Bronze Age of fantasy, the femme fatale trope is quickly becoming one of the most prominent. But what Fornice has over the others is an incredibly compelling origin story. Tatho explains that this new conquering Empress was originally the daughter of a swineherd, and later adopted by a priest named Aemon. And at this priestly clan, Fornice hides her true identity, even going so far as to claim divine parentage. But even more telling is how she kept this all a lie. Tatho says that Fornice suppressed any conversation that doubted her lineage, and even in her new family, rose to dominate the household that had taken her in. Dominance is kind of Fornice's bread and butter, because Tatho goes on to describe the battle that won Fornice the war. He explains how he, a seasoned veteran, with the largest army Atlantis had ever raised behind him, lost to this young, low-born woman. And man, I wish I could have seen this battle, like, in the moment. This book clearly has no problem dropping the reader into a situation where they have to just figure shit out. And so I wish we could have actually opened up the novel with a chapter from Tatho's perspective. One where he recounts all about the battle and all the history that we're learning right now, and we're able to see Fornice take the throne. It marks the beginning of one of my bigger problems with this novel, which is the first-person narration. The perspective you tell your story in should always be a deeply considered choice. And in this one, I felt staying completely in Deucalion's head sometimes prevented the narrative from being as expansive and cinematic as it could have been, and this is certainly one of those moments. But still, this intro is vastly more confident and complex than most that you'll find coming out of the Bronze Age. This opening, I'll say. Because technically there is a small prologue before this. And the reason I didn't begin this review with it is because I think it's completely useless to the story. It's a frame narrative done in that classic found footage way, but thankfully once you are into the main narrative, the opening quickly makes up for lost time. By the final pages of the first chapter, we know a lot about what kind of man Deucalion is, we've been introduced to many of the book's major players, and we've already set up the first major plot mystery. What is Forenese's intentions with the former viceroy of Yucatan? But before we learn that, we have to make the journey to the famed city itself. So far on my Great Fantasy Reading Challenge, world building has been one of the most unique aspects of each book to talk about. But in the Bronze Age, these fantasy worlds, while often brilliantly done, were typically dreamlike or absurdist in nature, and were never really designed to be that believable. And yet, The Lost Continent, nearly 40 years before Tolkien, manages to introduce the reader to a proper secondary world that feels really ahead of its time. Tolkien really frames Middle-earth as an alternative history, even if it's only in the background. And Atlantis operates in the same way, even referencing places like Egypt and the barbarian Europeans, as Deucalion would say, with the book kind of implying that the fall of Atlantis that is to come is the spark that will turn those barbarian Europeans into the world power they would become in our own history. And so there's this subtle meta layer to the world building that I thought was really clever and just adds a little bit more gravitas to the downfall that's about to come. But that's all really subtle stuff in the background. On the pages, in the moment, we get introduced to much of the world building as Deucalion sets sail for the capital. The ships are powered by basically the equivalent of solar panels, introducing the idea that this Atlantis is almost a techno-feudal society. But despite these advancements, the seamen still offer animal sacrifices to the sun god. Though I immediately doubt how merciful this sun god truly is, because about halfway through their journey, they're attacked twice. The first is man against nature, with the ships attacked by reptilian sea monsters, heavy storms, and even nearly being hit by what appears to be two meteorite stones crashing down from the sky. Already the god's true intentions for Atlantis is being foreshadowed. But the second attack in the next chapter is man against man. As Deucalion's ships are nearing the city of Atlantis proper, 3 ships flying no banners positioned to block their path. When the boats meet to discuss a parley, the opposing ship's captain, a man named Dason, states his desire. Deucalion handed over to them. Boats smash against each other, fire is wielded, swords are drawn, and it all ends with Dason offering his own head to Tob, who promptly cuts it, sticks the head on the galley's beak, and throws the rest of the body overboard, where a large man-eating bird flies away with it. It's a cool naval battle, ones that I always enjoy in my fantasy, though the question of who those other boats belong to and why they wanted him in the first place, it remains a mystery. Deucalion's fleet at last makes it to the city. Tall pyramids and temples aim for the sky. Strong walls encircle the massive city, and towering over it, casting a long dark shadow, is the sacred mountain. Massive Dragon Mount vibes from this straight away. But humbling this mighty civilization is an underbelly of injustice. In the throngs that line the streets, there were gaunt bodies and hungry faces everywhere. Here and there stood one, a man or a woman, as naked as a savage in Europe, and yet dull to shame. Already it's clear Atlantis is far from the utopian paradise that many other stories have represented it as. Deucalion is led through the city, reminiscing about his childhood, where he trained in the religious temples to become a priest of the sun god. He is one of the 7, one of the highest ranks of the priesthood. Only one rank, the members of the 3, are above him. And as always, Deucalion obeys and respects the authority, even going so far as to give his life for the order whenever the command arrives. And as he roams the city, Deucalion wonders if this is going to be his fate. What does Forenese want with him? We've heard a lot about Forenese so far, and I have to say, the presentation doesn't disappoint. Music blares, mounted soldiers ride in front, and behind them, Forenese emerges into the stone city riding a fucking mammoth. And this is the moment I knew I was gonna like this book. Any book with a mammoth in it, come chat to me. Deucalion's first moments with Forenice are steeped in anticipation. I mean, just based off of what we've heard, there's probably a 50% chance that Forenice has just brought him here to kill him. I mean, Forenice is trying to monopolize her power. What better way to ensure your own safety than to squash a potential threat before they can muster any resistance? But when she speaks, addressing to all the onlookers, she says openly that Deucalion is the strongest man in Atlantis, and that any who disobey him is equivalent to disobeying her. Forenice whispers to Deucalion that she brought him here to be her chief advisor, mostly because most other people just fawn at her and, turn into yes men, whereas she admires Deucalion for his sternness and independence. But Deucalion doesn't really know what to think of Forenice. The city seems turbulent under her rule. Forenice attributes the current issues in Atlantis to a singular problem: besiegers outside the city walls. And she says this so incredibly casually, as if a besieging army is like nothing to worry about. Deucalion, of course, has no idea about this and is shocked when she just casually suggests it. He swears his first action as advisor will be to put an end to these besiegers, and he seems raring to go, but the next chapter has them stopping at a royal banquet. Forenice assigns one of her fangirls, named Yilga, to show him the way. Yilga is the daughter of Aemon, an actual daughter of Aemon, unlike Forenice. And yet, regardless of this connection that they have, Yilga is kind of Forenice's slave. She says if she fails to dress Deucalion in the proper garb, she'll be whipped. It's very Geralt in Vizima, if you know what I mean. Yilga teases that Forenice has been planning Deucalion's arrival for months now, in a way that suggests that chief advisor isn't the true role the Empress wants him to fill. It all feels like a joke everyone knows the punchline to, except for Deucalion himself. In this chapter, we really see the decadence that Atlantis has fallen into under Forenice's rule. A great banquet is held with spiced foods and strong wines, and all of it happens while outside the pyramid, the peasants, of course, are starving. But the feasting is halted when a strange elderly man enters the room. And the old man is revealed to be Aemon himself. We've heard a little bit of Aemon before this point, but now we truly see the threat he represents. Aemon brings a final warning to Forenice, that while the gods have let her reach the throne, now, in order to keep it, she must undo her tyranny, feed the innocents, and restore the nation to peace. And of course, Forenice refuses, but Yilga herself begs the queen to listen, and says that these old priests have power that even Forenice couldn't guess at. And this is, of course, not what Forenice wants to hear. She strikes Yilga and sets her guards to attack the old man. While most stand still in cowardice, one obeys, but when he touches the old man, his hand goes immediately limp. His beard begins to fall out, and he is stricken with a sudden leprosy. Just when you thought you might have found a saint, a hero of the peasants, Aemon gives no fucks. He walks out of the room, his warning hanging in the air like a curse. And so, from this opening third, we learn everything we need to know about the world that is Atlantis. And for a fantasy from 1899, it is mightily impressive. Fantasy sea monsters, besiegers at the walls, a dangerous priestly order, and an oddly realistic depiction of a wealthy empire degraded into a tyrannic slaughterhouse. And in the middle of it all is Deucalion, our staunch, prudish protagonist. His job from here on out is to balance all these factions and try to stop the doom that Aemon foretold. Honestly, there's very little in my mind separating this from a modern Grimdark. The beginning wastes no time, the world building is thematically justified, and in this next section, the complex plot will be the latest to stomp into the party, maybe bringing a few more important guests with it. So the plot of the novel really revolves around Deucalion's shifting loyalties. For now, he's still loyal to the higher powers and to Forenice, but with his master Aemon being against her, he really becomes conflicted. After the banquet, he goes towards the city walls to deal with the rebels, and he sees that the guards who are defending the city have taken the prisoners from the besiegers and are now making a sport out of them and feeding them to the tigers. And most of the prisoners never really end up fighting back, except for one woman. She battles the tiger, striking it in the eye, and then leaps up the walls, grabbing the edge of the arrow slit where Deucalion is watching. The woman's name is Nais. She belongs to the rebel faction outside of the walls, and her mission was actually to kill Deucalion. She reveals now that it was her faction that sent the ships at the beginning. We get a kind of fun interrogation scene where Nais is trying to convince Deucalion that his own death would be beneficial for the city of Atlantis. And then Nais reveals a secret. One that seemingly is a secret to only Deucalion. She describes how, for months, Fornis has been in search of a husband and is always left wanting. So she sent for Deucalion, the man with the strongest reputation in all of Atlantis. And though this comes as a little bit of a shock to Deucalion, his loyalties still remain the same. If Fornis bids him marry, then he shall obey. It's simply his way. But Nais points out that his loyalty to Fornis is exactly the danger. She claims that together, wedded, Atlantis shall be put under a double tyranny of its two strongest leaders. She reminisces of days where she slept as softly as any in Atlantis, but now she can't watch Fornis continue her tyranny. This dynamic is made much more interesting because it's revealed that Nais is actually the sister of Ylga. So you have one sister on the inside as Fornis' puppet, and one on the outside trying to bring Fornis down. But curiously, Nais says she isn't on Zaemon's side either, for she thinks his ambitions to replace Fornis with the priesthood would be only replacing one tyranny for another. And for the first time, I feel like we've found someone who genuinely seems to care about the common folk. It's kind of refreshing in this mad world of tyrants and killers. Their conversation is interrupted by tremors in the earth, causing Deucalion to fall straight through the floor and straight into the besiegers' hands. It's a little bit of a lazy writing moment just to get Deucalion where he needs to be, but I could forgive it once. Eventually, Deucalion is saved from the prisons by Nais herself, which is really surprising to him because previously she had led the mission to kill him. But Nais says that after their fall, she believed he had been killed, and instead of joy, she felt only fear. And she realizes that Deucalion is the only man capable and strong enough to save Atlantis. When she goes to sneak Deucalion out of the camp, pretending he is her lover, we overhear the philosophy of the rebels. And kind of understandably, after Fornis' rule, the rebels have become complete anarchists. Though there is one man we find who's trying to sway the anarchists to his side. Nais' estranged father Aemon is there, and he makes a speech to the besiegers. And Aemon makes a few pretty good points. Before Fornis, the city was prosperous under the priest clan. Aemon spots Deucalion in the crowd because he's one of the few people who recognizes him, and he goes up to him. And Aemon wants Deucalion to be Fornis' husband, but instead of following her orders, to sway her back to peace and the gods. And Deucalion is, for some reason, upset with this, because he's starting to begin to have feelings for another woman. But Deucalion's one unbreakable trait, his loyalty to tradition, strikes again. And for the time being, he accepts Aemon's offer, despite how much it hurts him. Deucalion ends this plot section with even more split loyalties. The entire fate of Atlantis seems to rest on his allegiance, and his ability to sway a woman who's denied the ancient priest, denied the gods, denied her own personal history, and isn't even fazed when there's a literal army at her gates. What chance does the stubborn Deucalion have? I'd say the plot of The Lost Continent is one of its biggest strengths. It's fast-paced, fairly unpredictable, and has a decent balance of downtime, action set pieces, and politics. Though of all the greats of the fantasy genre, the characters are really where you live or you die. And I'd say that's probably true for The Lost Continent as well. Deucalion is great, and I think it's probably appropriate that we start with him. Very Ned Stark role, if that makes sense. But unlike Ned Stark, who's extremely honorable and just very good, Deucalion is not a hero. He's someone who wants to preserve a power structure that benefits from slavery, war, and injustice. And while he may feel pity for the common folk at times, he uses them for his own gains all the time. He's an interesting take on a real-world mythological character.
We'll get there when we get there, Pumpkin.
But there's one character we have yet to get to. Fornis. Fornis is the fire to Deucalion's ice. She's headstrong, relentless, and holds no allegiances to anything but her own goals. She kind of feels like if Aisha actually ended up doing the things that she threatened she could do in H. Rider Haggard's She. And this is best seen in the upcoming chapters which represent the romance arc of the novel. I mean, the first thing we find Fornis doing when Deucalion returns is pronouncing herself a god to her people. But when Deucalion and her speak, she admits it's all just an act to gain power and worship from the common folk. However, she does say that she wishes not to be a god, nor even an empress to him, but just a common woman. In all her days of conquering and ruling, she claims she's never truly felt passion or love, and desires it with Deucalion. During this conversation, the besiegers currently outside of the city walls are firing in catapults, and Fornis' mammoth is scared away and kind of runs through the streets in a panic. Deucalion and Fornis end up in the river and have to swim over to the docks. And with crazy timing, the fishermen pull up both Fornis and Deucalion, but also reveal that they have another prisoner. Nais is there, captured by the fishermen for trying to sneak into the city. And somehow with godlike intuition, Fornis just knows why she came into the city, and it might have to do with her potential husband. And this is where we really get to see the other side of Fornis, not the happy, giddy, we can be friends type. Because Fornis, after talking down to Nais, says that she will marry Deucalion in spite. And I thought in this moment, okay, Fornis' jealousy, she's gonna marry Deucalion. That's the thing. But it takes a bit more of a turn. You shall build me up the body of Nais beneath a throne of granite as a wedding gift, and you shall do it too with your own proper hands, my Deucalion, whilst I watch your devotion. And what she means here is that she is going to bury Nais alive on Deucalion's wedding day. And Deucalion can only really stand frozen and pretend to go along with this, though he does have plans to save her. And this section of the novel really just earns Fornis, in my opinion. Of course, you have the blurred line between what's really myth and what's her own genius, but you also have her jealousy for Nais and her real desire for true passion and true love. But on top of all of this, what am I talking about here? Fornis is just a badass. For some reason, the fishermen and Fornis scuffle, but she actually draws her fucking sword and takes them on in hand-to-hand combat. And even Deucalion in that moment is you know what? Fucking fairs. I'm falling in love with her in that moment. Deucalion gets a hard-on for that. Deucalion's plan to save Nais is a little bit complicated in my opinion. The first thing he does is speak with Ylga in hopes that she will help, which she thankfully does. There's a bit of a rivalry between her and Nais. I think Ylga's a bit jealous. This is a classic fantasy book. Everybody loves the main character. But the second step of his rescue is to go into the sacred mountain and pull out this weird, waxy magic ball. And apparently it will suspend anyone to stillness, to near death. And with Ylga's help, Deucalion is able to visit Nais' cell, where he gives her the drug. On the day of the wedding, Nais is brought out and humiliated in front of the crowd, and is sealed beneath the granite throne. And so Deucalion and Fornis get married, yay! But thankfully for him, to get his mind off of what just happened, the besiegers once again attack the city. And Deucalion uses the violence as a distraction. Though during this battle, the politics really escalate much quicker than I expected they would. Because while this attack is happening, Ylga comes and finds Deucalion to warn him that Fornis has learned of his betrayal. Apparently, Deucalion and Nais' conversations were overheard by one of the prisoners in the next cell. And so Ylga tells Deucalion to leave Atlantis for good. She says she's arranged a ship with Tobe, the ship captain that brought Deucalion to Atlantis in the opening chapters. And I think this is Ylga's best scene in the novel, where she's really just acting now upon her actual compassion and her true hatred for Fornis. Everything leading up to this cataclysmic ending is happening because of character decisions. I think plenty of epic fantasies forget this. With thousands of characters and dozens of books, I'd almost always rather read the Lost Continent's approach to character work, where yes, there's only a handful of important characters, but each one are stretched and used up for their value. She brings Deucalion to the ships, and after a conversation, they part. With Fornis still ruling Atlantis, Tobe desires to make a new kingdom for himself, and his plan is to go and conquest an island of savage natives, as you might imagine, and to make Deucalion their king. And of course, Deucalion refuses. Kingship is never really his goal. But Tobe insists that if he is not a king, then he shall be worshipped in his kingdom as their god. And this once again brings up the idea of this book retelling myths and kind of showing you the true history behind them. Because in myth, Deucalion is the son of Prometheus, who was one of the few survivors of a great flood Zeus sends to destroy the corrupt Bronze Age civilization.
Why does that sound familiar?
The fall of Atlantis, the rise of the Europeans, and Deucalion himself, this whole book acts like the explanation to those world events. And in true mythic tradition, Deucalion's exile feels like a great walk of judgment, because Deucalion's exile leads him to the volcanic desert lands that surround Atlantis. He endures years of brutal survival, fending off poisonous lizards, boiling rivers, and starvation. All the while, he looks into the distance and can see the sacred mountain. It's a very short chapter, but one that covers a surprisingly vast amount of time. And it's one I wish we could have gotten even more introspection from. But thankfully, big things do happen by the end of it. Deucalion spends years in exile, but finally he decides to go towards the sacred mountain. And there, on its snowy peaks, Aemon returns. It's a great confrontation here on the snowy slopes of the mountain, with Aemon's wizard staff blazing. It's like Obi-Wan vibes if he was a psychopathic wizard. And Aemon has come to deliver a message. He says that Fornis has gone above and beyond, and has laid siege to the sacred mountain itself. And Aemon, of course, tells Deucalion that he must return to Atlantis and save it. And Aemon doesn't, ask Deucalion. It's a command from one of the three. A command Deucalion has always obeyed. And I think this moment, more than any other, encapsulates the themes of the novel. The theme of duty versus passion, and attempting to balance those two things. Because Fornis is all passion. She abides by no tradition, respects no natural law or god, can never control her jealousy or anger, gets herself into deadly peril for the thrill of it, and desires above all else to feel real love, real emotions, real humanity. And on the opposite spectrum, Aemon is all duty. He works only for an unachievable ideal of prosperity, obeys the gods without question, claims to care for humanitarian peace, but then will watch as his own daughter is buried alive and the other is enslaved. And then in the middle of it is Deucalion, who for the whole length of the book has been leaning towards Aemon's level of emotionlessness. Deucalion feels like what a younger Aemon might have been, a stoic man rising up the ranks of the priesthood, with clear compassion in his heart, and yet makes choices that continuously strip him of his humanity. Deucalion could have lost himself here in the desert, but finally, at this point, he makes a choice. I think those years staring out at the sacred mountain and being away from everything that Atlantis was kind of revealed to him what was important in his life. Because this time, though he's broken and exiled, he demands one thing, the saving of Nais. And even when Aemon is reluctant, though Nais is literally his own daughter, Deucalion doesn't budge. Even if it means the end of Atlantis itself, he will not live like Aemon does. He will save Nais. And alas, the final third is really ramping up now. But the reason why I'm discussing prose in this section is because Deucalion's return to Atlantis and the confrontations he has there were a little bit messy for me. As an example, as Deucalion is on his way to Atlantis, he gets bitten and poisoned by some centipede monster and is healed back to life by a forest nymph, and then tells him what he needs to know about what's happened in Atlantis. And this forest nymph plotline is cool, but why couldn't Aemon have just said this all when they were talking? This is what I mean by word economy. Deucalion is met by a priest named Ro, who works for Aemon and who helps him sneak into the sacred mountain. And from there, Deucalion can see the snake throne that Nais still lies buried beneath. And Aemon says that he will keep his side of the bargain and help to free Nais using the earth tremors he can cause from the magic of the mountain. While Fornis is distracted, Deucalion goes to the snake throne and the mountain tremors rip it open. And Deucalion has to flee, through these earth tremors with Nais on his back, all the way back to the sacred mountain. Outside, the city of Atlantis is being ripped open, but inside, Deucalion tries to wake his lost love from the clutches of death itself. And this is perhaps the best scene in all the novel. For once, the prose really shines here, but it's more just how cool the scene is. The nails of her fingers had grown to such a great length that they were twisted in spirals. Her shoulders and neck had lost their comely curves, and made bony hollows now in which the dust of entombment lodged black and thickly. Her clay-cold lips were so bright that one sighed to remember the full beauty of their carmine. It's a striking image to behold, and it creates one of the more grotesque, yet I think realistic depictions of a magical healing that so many other fantasies have attempted. Deucalion waits for hour upon hour, watching her in the bath for any sign of life. He gets desperate, adding more of his priestly herbs and magic to the bath, and after 9 years of sleep in the grave, Slowly, very slowly, Nais returns. It starts with no movement, but a faint rippling on the surface of the water, a little color to her face. And over the course of more hours, not daring to do anything more, Deucalion sits and watches the recovery happen. And throughout the novel, the romance arc between Deucalion and Nais is pretty mid in my opinion. It's pretty tropey, but this one scene almost makes you believe it. Hein does well to make you believe Atlantis could exist, believe Fornis is a psycho, believe Deucalion's loyalties to the priesthood. He does that all really well. But the best books always ensure that you can feel it too. Feel it in your bones. And this is probably the first time I really felt it. And so we finally reach the end, the cataclysmic ending of Atlantis. And so from here, with only a couple of chapters left to go, how does it get to that point? Well, first, Deucalion, after saving Nais, heads back into the fight. Fornis is willing to do everything to get inside of the mountain, because inside the mountain is the secrets of the priesthood. Another person who would greatly desire this is Tatho, Fornis's new husband, and of course Deucalion's old friend. And Tatho reveals here that he's really not much else than a gold digger. The second Fornis wants to marry him, he left Yucatan to the cannibals. But while this conversation is happening, Fornis unveils her final weapon. Grand returns, and this time it's trying to bring down the Lonely Mountain. And from there, Deucalion basically knows it's wraps. And as he's been fantasizing for the entire novel, he decides he wants a glorious death. But of course, at the last moment, Aemon steps in and stops him. But what Aemon goes on to describe is really the crux of the ending, and I'm not yet certain how I feel about it. As Aemon leads Deucalion into the Ark of the Mysteries, where the secrets of the priesthood are held, they overlook the land, and see encircling the ancient city vast, mighty waves of water rolling in. The desolation has come. And the reason why it's happening now is a little bit ambiguous, but if I had to make a guess, Fornis's greed and her ambition forced the gods to bring a downfall to her kingdom. But the gods made an escape route for those who were faithful. The Ark of Mysteries was built for this exact moment. Aemon explains that inside are preserves and anything someone would need to survive. Everything two people would need to survive. That's right, one man and one woman. Deucalion and Nais are the ones Aemon chooses to survive the downfall. And I'm really conflicted about this ending, to be honest. Atlantis' downfall, like the actual downfall moment, is really rushed in my opinion. The Ark of Mysteries being so important to the ending really felt like it needed more of a setup in the earlier sections. Of course, we get the mountain like kind of always being there in the background, and so obviously it's going to be significant, but the actual reason why Atlantis falls seemingly is not something that's ever explained before that point, besides Aemon's like warning to Fornis in the beginning. And the last confrontation between Fornis and Deucalion, and also Ylga, who's present as well, it really was not as good as it could have been. And of course, the prologue that is there at the beginning of the novel never returns. Why does it exist? Like, I don't know, man. And so my thoughts on The Lost Continent by C.J. Cutcliffe Wright Hein really comes down to one question: my official rating. It's perhaps the toughest book I've had to rate so far on my Great Fantasy Reading Challenge. The first half is one of my favorite openings in the Bronze Age so far. The pacing was elite, none of it felt rushed, and the tension was slowly rising. The world building is especially impressive. However, the second half, while eventful and having some great scenes thrown in, really didn't feel like it paid off the promises of the first half. And the ending, while you knew it was coming, lacked a real climactic high point, especially when it came down to the villain confrontations. Unlike many of these old head fantasy fans, I'm fine accepting the idea that just because something didn't do it first doesn't mean it didn't do it better. Because fantasy politics have been more thrilling since. Femme fatales have been more dangerous and cunning, even in the Bronze Age. And mythic tragedies have shed more tears than this version of Atlantis' fall. But I think regardless of the era you're holding this up against, The Lost Continent still holds up. Most fantasy in the Bronze Age were dreamlike fairy stories or children-centric portal fantasies. But The Lost Continent proves fantasy can be something more. And to me, just in my headcanon, feels like one of the forgotten forefathers of one of the largest lineages in fantasy history. Like, this is truly ahead of its time. And so for that reason, I'm giving The Lost Continent a 5.9 out of 10, just barely missing out on a 4-star read. And while some may think that score sounds like I dislike it, please know that anything above a 5 out of 10 is considered a positive review. And I'm certain as we continue on the Great Fantasy Reading Challenge into newer eras, there's going to be a lot of fan favorites that I put below this. But additionally, I don't think anyone calling this a classic or a masterpiece is right either. However, it did have the potential. Very few books even get to that point. It deserves to be a myth that gets revived from its long undead sleep. And hopefully this video serves as one piece of the arc that saves it from turning into just another piece of lost history. But for now, I shall see you soon. Ciao.